tell me about yourself question is like a very, very powerful question that a lot of people don't put time into. It's your elevator pitch. It's your story. And that is such a cool opportunity to really draw curiosity. Like we become curious when people bring things up that we're like, oh my gosh, like looking at you, I had no idea that you were really into like chess and you're actually a world-class player and like all these things that don't even relate to the job, but show that you're an interesting person. And so I like to bring up things that aren't necessarily work related.
So Jay, let's dig into it. How did you find out about tech sales? Was it your plan to start on this path or what?
I'll be honest, it was not. So growing up, both my parents had really solid careers in medical sales. My dad worked for Johnson & Johnson and my mom worked for Abbott Diagnostics. So both leading companies in the medical space. So naturally out of college, when I graduated with a Bachelor of General Studies, I thought I'd pursue a career in medical. And so I spent about 6 months after graduating strictly focusing on medical companies. And to be honest, I just couldn't get in. And it really hurt me that I couldn't follow the same track that my parents both did. And so for me, it was like, okay, what's the second best option I have right now? And I started looking at all the industries, everything that was up and coming. And I landed on tech. And I'm super happy I did, because in a lot of ways, I see tech as the new medical. Medical back in the early 2000s was a way different ballgame. It was before HIPAA, before anything else. And so when you look at tech, we're kind of in that cool Wild West period where there's a lot of growth, a lot of income potential, but not a lot of restrictions for sellers to go out and really make an impact. Where a lot of my friends who did get into medical, who are my age, they're dealing with a lot of nuances and restrictions, which are capping their abilities to make meaningful money. So yeah, it was a complete chance or a complete accident, you could call it. But really, like, it was one of the best accidents that ever happened to me.
Do you think tech sales is more conducive to like flexibility and remote work than say medical device sales or like solar sales?
Yeah. And what's interesting is I didn't recognize that, but during a lot of my medical interviews, I did get a few small offers in rural areas like Wichita, Kansas, where I could, run my own territory. But yeah, like a lot of my friends who got into medical, they're in their car every day. Like it's not a remote friendly position because your office is the hospitals that you cater to. And so if you almost look at it in terms of the antithesis of medical sales and traveling, tech sales gives you way more flexibility.
And that's a huge plus. A lot of people are looking for that. And in your journey into tech sales and even in your medical device journey of interviewing, didn't you get rejected a lot? Like what was the reality of that journey?
It was a harsh reality. I mean, so I guess backtrack about 4 years, I had an ugly man bun, which I think hurt me a lot in the interview process.
Yeah. You owned it, though.
Yeah. I had that. There's, it's a tough industry, but yeah, I think like ultimately the way I looked at it is I was always going after big companies. So Stryker, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott, where my mom worked, like all the big companies that you could want. And so every time that I didn't get to a next round, I used that data as feedback of how I could improve my interview process. And so I became maniacal in the art of interviewing because that's the second language a lot of people don't realize. And I see it in sales nowadays where you have some of the best sellers failing in interviews because it's a second language that they've never learned. And so I became obsessed with the art of interviewing during that process. And so when the time came to interview at Dell, which was a very scary interview for me to go into, I actually had a lot of confidence because I had a lot of data on where I failed. And that's really accelerated my career and the careers of plenty of others that I've worked with.
Yeah. I love that you just saw, failure as feedback and you became maniacally focused on becoming an expert interviewer. And now you're able to help others with that as well. So we're going to talk about the process of getting into Dell and actually take a peek under the hood of common questions you'll get and what that process looks like. But before that, can you talk about the benefits of working at a top enterprise company like Dell?
Totally. And really good question. now that I've had a chance to work with a lot of people who have also landed in top companies and people who have gone the startup route, inherently there's pros and cons to both. I'll be completely honest. But when you look at the benefits that I was looking for when I joined Dell, a lot of them came true. So what I really wanted is I wanted to get paid to learn. And so that concept taught me to look for a company that had a proven sales development program. And so back in the day, I'm like, okay, I just want a long onboarding process where it's like 2 to 3 months where they're just invested in me. They're teaching me sales. They're teaching me how to do things, compared to some companies that might be like, okay, well, you're going to join this week and you're going to be on your own the next week. I'm like, no. I want training. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think that is a huge benefit. I also think another benefit is when you get into larger companies, a lot of times they clearly have more resources and marketing material. And so the brand recognition helps a lot with your cold call and emailing efforts. And so instead of, maybe fighting an uphill battle every day, like just to get name recognition of like, oh, like someone knows you, it's a lot easier to call or email someone and say, hey, this is Jay at Dell. Clearly like not working in the laptop segment and working in the enterprise storage segment, there's like a lot of obstacles to like get people warmed up to the idea or like cross-sold into the portfolio. But I will say like in terms of the benefits, like name recognition and development are like two of the big ones that I really harp on when I explain the benefits of working for a big company.
Man, I love that. And I found it to be the same case at Oracle. Working at a top company, you get marketability, training, and it just sets you up to launch your career. And I had to ask you more specifically, I just would love a look under the hood on the training program. Like what was that actually like? Because it seems like it's world-class training. Weren't there people like paid to train you consistently? What was the program like?
Yeah, so I think the weirdest concept that I had to grasp with was the fact that when I became a sales development rep, we had like, just in our Austin, Texas office, we had like 6 to 8 development managers who made all over 6 figures, and their whole calendars were dedicated just to hot seats, mock calls, verbals, like whatever we needed to upskill us. And I'm like, this is crazy. And we had different metrics where we had to do 2 or 3 development sessions a week. And we just got feedback 24/7. And so the program is so airtight that it's almost impossible to fail. And kind of tying back into that last question of like one of the benefits as well is when you work with a large company and they have a proven sales process and proven revenue to a certain extent, there's a lot more certainty in your promotion path. So I've worked with people who they have a different risk tolerance and they wanted to optimize for different things early in their career. And so they took a path to work at a startup. Well, startups are good and you can get a lot of equity, but the risk you face is if the AEs above you aren't closing top line revenue, there's not going to be the justification to your leaders to open up more territories for SDRs to get promoted. I knew with Dell being a proven product and a proven process, there'd be a lot less risk in getting that first promotion. So a lot of like benefits with going into a big company, but I think, the promotion path and having 6 to 8 managers in my back pocket at all time really accelerated my growth.
So when it comes to breaking into tech sales at a company like Dell, someone realizes after hearing this conversation, even the beginning of it, that I want to get into Dell. Obviously you got to look at your resume and polish it up. So do you have any tips on how to create a resume that catches folks' attention?
Yeah. So really good question, because I think resume is one of those things that's being overlooked nowadays. Like there's all these AI tools and like tips and tricks out there. Like you got to structure it this way. I look at it from just a psychological perspective. And I've used this in every interview to be 99% better than any other candidate before my mouth even opens. And so it's like, how do you do that? And it's the experience you give someone when you interview. So when I look at like resume and cover letter, a lot of it's about like the UX and UI, like the design and how easy it is to just read it, understand, okay, like who is Chris Bussing? Like, can they understand that by looking at your resume? And so I think a common pitfall nowadays is people still continue to have like a black and white boring resume.
Yeah.
They don't put extra time into it. They don't understand how someone's going to look at it, or like the feeling someone gets when they actually click the file to open it. And you want it to be a good experience where they're amazed. They're like, wow, Chris Bussing, this is a really easy resume. I feel like I've learned about him. And when it comes to like tangible things that I do specifically, I like to highlight my awards on the left side in like a very simplistic manner. That way it's not intertwined in the meat and potatoes of the actual bullet points. Another hack, and I swear I've been asked this in every interview, is I keep my hobbies at the bottom. So not skills. Like I don't flex that I know how to do Excel or Outlook. Like it's kind of a gimme.
It's like a buzzword too. It's just,
Yeah. And so it's like when I started focusing on hobbies at the bottom, I realized that the people recruiting me, like they aren't just recruiting me. Like they're actually recruiting hundreds or thousands of people throughout a year. And so any way that I could stand out as a person and create better rapport and give them an opportunity to build that rapport helped me stand out in the interview process. So I would say like, UX, UI of your resume, which is super easy. Like I have templates on my website you can check out. You can go to Etsy and buy a template, as well as hobbies. Like those are two things I don't see a lot of people doing. And if there's, more detail you want to get into, happy to, but there's so many small steps to the interview process and the resume itself to really stand out.
Yeah, I was talking to a hiring manager at TikTok, so not a typical B2B tech sales company, but I think they sell to businesses with marketing and different things. And she said, I want to work with people who are cool and have interests beyond the 9 to 5. Like one of my direct hires loves yoga and this and that. So to your point, I think that is just a nugget to give them an opportunity to connect with you, And one other question I had, or maybe two on the resume, is what do you think about the bio at the top? Because my thought is like that's an opportunity to show a little personality too and kind of what's in it for them. But do you emphasize like creating a nice little bio or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I like doing a bio. I've actually been getting into copywriting a lot, so I now understand the significance of it. But just like when you email a CEO, like you want to give them a quick blurb about like what you do or who you are. Clearly, if it's a CEO, it's more others oriented. But for the sake of like handing over a white paper or a resume, it's nice that you can get a document and there's just one crisp part at the top. And it's like, okay, this is Chris Bussing. Here is what Chris is about. So I highly recommend it. But it is one of those activities where it's like, okay, do it, but do it well.
And don't write a novel, like where it's too long. But I was talking to someone recently that is Albanian. And I think he mentioned this concept of besa, like this term that is like, we will give you everything we got. And it basically was like this interesting thing, very unique to him that wasn't relevant to anyone else, but gave a little idea of what he would bring to the table. So maybe, something like that could be interesting to put in the top. But what about just to round out the resume piece, and then maybe we'll talk about LinkedIn a little bit. What about the actual experience itself? Is there a lens through which you encourage people to portray their experience in the actual body of the resume? Totally.
And again, my hot take is the structure and the UX and UI of the resume is actually more important than the content itself. Clearly, like I talk about the content.
I like that.
Definitely have a lot of like metrics and tangibles. But when it comes to structuring a job in your resume, I love doing, and this is a little simplistic, but like the job title, I like having a 1 or 2 sentence blurb on what you did in that job, like the high level overview. And then, 3 or 4 bullet points with some of the data that was some of the data from your results and experience at the job. Because working in the sales space or pretty much any job, I feel like, sales specifically, there's a million different terms sometimes for like a sales development rep at different companies. It could be like an account manager with a hunting focus. It could be like a closing role for a small, like there's a lot of naming conventions that can overlap. And so to take the guesswork out of your hiring manager's way, it's like just make the sentence or two to explain what you actually did in that role. And then they're like, okay, like this was more of like a sales development representative position, or this was more of a management position. Like in general, it just helps when you can lay it out in a very simplistic sentence or two.
Yeah, good point. And I like that you said, focus on some metrics, relevant results, and always think about highlighting qualities and skill sets that are relevant, too. What about LinkedIn? We don't have to spend a lot of time on this because today we're really here to talk about interviewing and the meat and potatoes. But any thoughts on LinkedIn as a asset, as a tool in the process?
Yeah, like LinkedIn is always going to be the initial buffer people look at you through. So yeah, like you could start an interview with someone, but like they're going to check you out on LinkedIn. I would say the main thing is like people say like, okay, like your LinkedIn, it's like your professional resume. I don't really buy into that. Like, I think it's like a representation of who you are. And so like, don't feel like you need to have like all the data, all the metrics. They'll see that on your resume when you hand it to them. But I think the main thing is like, how can you optimize things to still give them that feeling and that professional feeling about you? So I would say a main optimization thing is get a good headshot. Like it doesn't cost that much.
Yep.
Smile, show you're friendly, have a good background photo that correlates with your hobbies. So when I did field sales at Dell, my territory was Colorado and Utah. So I had the Rocky Mountains in my banner.
Love it.
And then having like a short description about like who you are, what you're into, and a lot of things can give you a competitive advantage, and even like good copywriting in your resume and your bio, and like taking the time to make sure you're crafting a good story about yourself can go a long way. So yeah, I'd say with LinkedIn, like make it look professional, make it feel like inviting that someone can connect with you and be like, okay, like, Chris Bussing, he's a really good guy. But it's almost one of those things that's like a non-negotiable. Like you don't want a recruiter to look at your profile and it's like a selfie of you, at midnight at this, late night show you were at. It's like, just make it look good, do the work.
Yeah. I think you really highlighted resume and LinkedIn in a great way, which is don't overthink it, but it is important. It's foundational, and aesthetics are really important, and just coming across as professional, and particularly visual elements like a good headshot, which might cost a little money, but it's definitely worth the investment. So really good stuff. Before the interviewing, I do have to ask you about networking. Like I'm a big believer. I know we talk about this on networking and creating a warm inroad to earn an interview. I'm just curious to get your high level thoughts on the importance of networking and any tips on, say, like networking with SDRs or AEs to get a warm referral.
Yeah. So that's like a big theme that I'm seeing right now in the market is I get so many messages every day like, hey, Jay, I just applied to 50 companies, 100 companies, and I'm not hearing back from anyone.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, have you reached out directly to anyone and like asked them about the company, what they like about it? Have you asked for a referral? And sometimes it's like, I haven't gone that route. It's like too time intensive. Like it just doesn't seem like it's worth it. And so what I like to do with different people that I'm coaching, because in one of my offers, I have like a full distribution network of like 30 to 50 companies where they just get instant referrals to like AWS, Google, all the top players, is break down, like if you really break down what method of applying for an interview yields and you actually getting an interview, pretty much everyone I work with, they'll be like, okay, like anytime I get a referral, I get a first call like 99% of the time. And every time I cold apply, it might be like 5% of the time. And so it's like, if you break down your time into how you're allocating it, I would rather do the activities that yield me to getting an interview 99% of the time than just wasting my time doing these random cold applications that go through these ATS systems that might not even take into consideration any of your experience and automatically decline you. So when I look at the power of networking, it's a non-negotiable for getting a job. Like A, you get more intel to what the company's actually like. And then B, like you have the chance to get a referral. And I don't know, like maybe you connect with the right employee who has an amazing brand at that company that puts your name in the pot, And then all of a sudden the recruiters are looking at you like you're a superstar. And who knows, like maybe the person who referred you even gets a referral bonus.
Yes.
So it's like this amazing synergy. But I think the main thing is when you network, you have to have put in the work with like a professional looking resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, and actual interview prep. Because if you can't impress that person on a 15-minute call, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, really good point. So let's dig into interview prep. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Dell interview process and questions to prepare for and things like that more concretely. But just at a super high level, what are the things people need to think about in terms of how they can prepare to beat 99% of the candidates, which is really your thing with elite tech sales?
Yeah. So the first one, like you can break it into a few categories, but the first category is like, okay, what needs to be done before my mouth even opens? And that's like resume, cover letter, and LinkedIn. Like, let's get those in a good working state. We don't have to mess with it too much. Like they're good documents. So it's like, check.
Yep.
Let's get that done.
We checked that in this conversation. So what's next?
So we get that done. And then it's like, okay, at some point you have to open your mouth. So how do we prepare for that? And that is a process that I've put a lot of time and effort into, and it's yielded amazing results. But the high level framework and where a lot of people get wrong is they don't build a database. And so when I say build a database, like you actually have to map out all the questions you could possibly get asked, and then you have to come up with answers for those questions. So it's legit like a college assignment. Like when I did it, when I was prepping for a lot of my interviews, I think I used Quizlet. Like I made all the questions and then I made all the answers. And nowadays you could probably use ChatGPT and be like, hey, most top 50 common SDR questions. Now, the second part of that process, like I said, is writing down your answers. And those answers have to be very unique. So a common pitfall in interviewing is people pull from the same experience way too many times. So the second step is actually creating very unique answers. And this is one of the most strenuous activities mentally for people, is to come up with like 50 or 60 different unique answers. Yeah. So that itself is step 2. Step 3 is how do you structure those answers? And so there's 3 buckets that I typically teach people. I call them slam dunk, star, and technical. An example of a slam dunk would be questions you know you're going to get asked in every interview. So that is, hey, Chris, tell me about yourself. Like you know you're going to be asked that, so you should literally slam dunk it every time with an amazing story.
Like, why do you want to work here? Would that also be like do you consider that a slam dunk?
Why do you want to work here? Yeah. Why do you want to work in sales? Why do you want to work in tech sales? Like those are questions you're going to get asked sometime throughout the interview process. And because you know you will get asked it, it should be a slam dunk answer.
Yes.
The second type of way that you can reply to an answer is the STAR method that we're familiar with. That's situation, task, action, and result. When people are first getting started with that, sometimes I'll be like, hey, if you get lost in the sauce, just paint a really good setting and end with the result. And if like the T and the A get mixed up, like we can polish that over time.
Yeah.
And then, the last part is just technical questions. So SDR roles are getting very competitive, especially the ones that I train people for. So even if it's not a big name company, it could be a Series C startup that's very, very competitive, and they want to bring in people who can make an instant revenue impact. And so they could ask very technical questions like, okay, Chris, who is our ICP and how would you target or how would you prioritize a list of 100 leads?
Yeah.
And so we teach you a lot of the technical knowledge to answer those questions confidently. And so when you break it down, it's like, okay, you have step 1, which is like, how do you look good before your mouth even opens? And then the whole back end where it's like, okay, once you actually start talking, how do you make yourself stand out? And putting them together make you a very competitive candidate.
Really insightful. So slam dunk questions, star questions, which reminds me of like the behavioral interview questions where tell me about a time, you set a stretch goal and achieved it. How did you achieve it? Things like that. And then technical questions related to the role, common challenges you'll face, like prioritizing a leads list. So that's super helpful for folks to know what to like the common categories of questions and then to, start to practice in advance. Obviously, if they do work with a curriculum, a program like Elite Tech Sales, they're going to get the answers to the test, right? They're going to get an idea of what those questions are, and they'll get coaching from you. Now, are there other ways that they can get questions ahead of time, like common questions so they can really prepare?
Yeah. So it's a great call out on your end, because it really does tie back to networking. Because a lot of times when you network with people who work at the companies, they can give you insight into questions they remember from interviewing. If you want to take interviewing to the next level, a lot of companies, they actually interview based on their values. So like AWS, for example, they have, I think it's like 11 core values that they interview on. And when you get into the final 8-hour interview day where you're talking to so many people throughout the interviews, they actually, each of the people in the process, they're holding on to a value of the company and seeing if your answers align with them. So to your point, like to get the answers to the test, you can really ask people at the company. I think another like hack, you could call it, that I always do in interviews, like no matter what the role is sometimes towards the beginning of the interview or in the screening call, I just ask them straight up. I'm like, hey, what does a good SDR candidate look like for this role? Or what are the key characteristics that you're looking for? And so the beauty of asking that question is you're displaying your sales competence in terms of qualifying and then positioning.
Yes.
It's like, okay, you guys are looking for hard work, coachability, and the ability to work through like, tough situations and be able to like be responsible to drink out of the fire hose and multitask. Well, if that's what you're looking for, and I ask that at the beginning of an interview, well, then I can position myself on the back end with how I answer my questions to relate to those values that you care about.
Yeah, that's so good. I've done that too. I asked for the answers to the test. Like, what do you value in a hire, or another kind of variations, like what are some of the successful reps on your team doing differently? You get the answers to the test, and at the end, like if we didn't get to it, I might even ask for like, do you mind if I share, you mentioned this was important to you, like being gritty, to share an example of a time that like, and they're like, they're not going to say no. And then you can bring it home. But okay, yeah, really good stuff, man. So we get the answers to the test, and we're preparing to answer, these questions, for example, slam dunk, behavioral or STAR questions, technical role related. Let's just dig into like a few examples, like concrete examples. So how about like, tell me about your resume, or tell me about your background, tell me about yourself, right? The different variations. How would you just high level think about answering that question in an effective way? Yeah.
So I think the tell me about yourself question is like a very, very powerful question that a lot of people don't put time into. It's like, it's your elevator pitch. It's your story. And that is such a cool opportunity to really draw curiosity. Like humans are very, like we become curious when people bring things up that we're like, oh my gosh, like looking at you, I had no idea that you were really into like chess and you're actually a world-class player, and like all these things that don't even relate to the job, but show that you're an interesting person. And so a lot of times when I'm telling people about myself, I like to bring up things that aren't necessarily work related, but still show the characteristics that would make me successful in a work environment. And so, yeah, like I could probably ramble on like every other candidate of like, yeah, like I, love, when I hit quota and working hard to do my dials every day and like everything like that. But if you're trying to, fit in and like essentially say what everyone else is saying, like you're not going to have as good a success rate. So for me, it's like, what are the unique angles I can highlight about myself that show that I'm a very unique candidate and draw interest? So a lot of times when I'm introducing myself, it's like, yeah, like I do a lot of cool stuff outside of work. I am working on different side projects. Well, probably not side projects. You don't want to tell employers that, but I'd say, like I do talk a lot about fitness. So I did like a half Ironman once, did a marathon once, different things I'm geeking out on. So whether it's like I tried the carnivore diet for a while, and I was eating like raw meat for a long time. And it kind of shows them that like I'm interested in trying new things. I have a knack to push myself outside of the
Yeah.
work environment. And I think when you can really highlight like who you are as a person, that really differentiates you when they go back into the meeting room and they talk about the 15 candidates that they interviewed that day. They're like, yeah, like everyone's very qualified for this role, but like, who do we want to work with? Like, whose personality did we get along with, or who's just an interesting person who would add to the culture? And so I really like doubling down with just things that make you very unique.
That is so good. And you show some underlying qualities that are really important to success in sales and in life, like grittiness and commitment required to do a marathon, and your willingness to experiment and try new things. Because sales really is an experiment. You got to put yourself out there. And yeah, I just feel like someone, if I heard that, I'd be like, oh, Jay's pretty cool. And I want to know more about him. I could see myself hanging out with him and chatting out over some beers after work. So, okay, how about behavioral and STAR questions? Let's go through, I mean, at least one example, could hit two, but at least one from Dell, like an actual question you got of like a like a STAR question and how you might think about answering that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was so long ago since I interviewed for the SDR role, but there were a few that stuck out. Like this wasn't a STAR one, but like one was like, I think it was like, tell me about the most complex subject you've ever learned and teach me about it.
Yeah.
I think like STAR related, one that I got was, tell me about like one of your most significant personal goals you've ever set for yourself and how did you achieve it?
Yeah.
So I had to walk them through the situation, task, action, and result. And what's really unique about a question like that is you can take it anywhere. But a lot of times what they're looking for is they're just trying to see like how big your goals are, or like what gives you a sense of significance. And so for me, one thing that I started doing like 4 years ago as I was interviewing for Dell is I started this community called Sober October, and all my friends. Yeah, you were a part of it. Yeah.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, I had like a ton of friends joining it, and the metrics that year were like ridiculous. Like it was something like we had to like we were doing at least like 3 to 5 miles like running. There was like a biking component, and like all of it was getting tracked on a leaderboard, and it was very competitive people. Like my buddy Hunter Weiss, he was on it and he just completed a sub 3-hour marathon for New York. Just like a lot of really good athletes were a part of it. And so I told them that story about like how I started it, how it's grown into what it became that year, and pretty much like not just the back end operations to get that going, but like the actual effort I had to put in for 30 days in order to compete with these high performing athletes. And so that's like a question that stands out to me. And if you really think about like how I answered it, like a lot of things are nested into it. It's like, okay, this guy is very like entrepreneurial. Like he can build things with like a snap of a finger. Like he can efficiently figure out like what he wants to do. He can go out and achieve it at a very high level. Not only that, but he can actually execute the actions that go with it. And so when you look at the evergreen principles you want out of an SDR, it's typically work ethic, ability to solve problems, ability to be responsible, like things like that. And so a lot of my storytelling through STAR questions convey the values that they actually want in the role.
That is so good. And the question about explaining a complex concept, I think that just what's behind that, just acknowledge that question because it's a good one, is that in sales you need to be able to explain things simply, like to your grandma, you know, like say a complex concept like cloud computing. And I still work on this myself, but executives need you to get to the point quickly, to the why does this matter? And so that was a good example, by the way. But thanks for walking us through this concrete example. And let's hit on one more interview question example related to like a role related or technical question. You get a leads list. How do you prioritize? And a quick note is I got that question in my SDR interviews with Oracle 9 years ago. So how would you think about answering that one?
Yeah. So obviously like it depends, but you can make some assumptions as you're going through the question. A lot of times, like you have to stack rank your leads list based on the most likelihood to spend. And that can be a lot of different factors. But the simplistic way that I always put it, just because you don't need to over rotate for a lot of these SDR roles, is okay, like who's most likely to spend with you? It's people already spending with you. So it's like, can you get them to spend more? They've already spent $1. So can you get them to spend more? So for myself at Dell, like granted, like a lot of our enterprise grade storage portfolio, it's like very expensive. So they might not be spending in that category, but they might have a Dell laptop. So how can I leverage that current spend to get them to cross-sell and eventually buy data storage from our portfolio? So for me, it's like, let's start with spenders. And then maybe if no one's spending in storage, then it's like, okay, let's go down to the people spending on laptops or servers. And then it's like, okay, if we're not getting any of that, maybe we look to just white space accounts. And then out of those white space accounts, let's prioritize by what verticals we feel like would need our solution more than other verticals. So for on-premise storage, it might be engineering teams. Certain banks like to stay compliant and stay on-premise with their data. So it's really just understanding when you go into the interview, like who is the ideal customer of the company that you're interviewing for, and then really just prioritizing leads based on most likely to spend.
So can you walk us through the overall interview process at Dell? Because it's just helpful to know, like at a top company, what it might look like, especially for those who actually want to hit you up and maybe take their shot at Dell. Yeah.
And I'm positive it's changed so much over, the years, but every now and then I have people who are, really, really passionate about taking the same path I did. And so I'll, give them the lowdown, and really, the structure that was there before COVID, I think it's still there, just maybe expanded given like, some of the differences COVID brought with, training methodologies or interviewing methodologies. But the main thing is you'll start off with a video interview, and that video interview might be like 15 minutes, and questions pop up on the screen. You might have 2 attempts to answer them, and then it goes into a database and the recruiters review it. And then after that, that's when you might have an opportunity to go on site. So I actually flew up to Boston back in the day.
Cool.
And I had a full half-day interview with Dell. And it's super scary because you get into a room and there's like 15 other people that got flown out for an interview that day. And you're just like, wow, like I am competing against so many people to get this role. Like I got to do good. And you after the breakout room, you all start interviewing with different hiring managers. I think I had like 3 or 4 interviews that day. And I also had to do like a mock cold call and like all this other stuff. And then at the end of it, I got a shadow an SDR who was on the floor and kind of asked them questions. And I think for the most part, Dell has gotten really good at really consolidating on who they fly out or do an interview day with, because they do interview days a lot. Like it's a very, very competitive role to get. And so the main thing I want to overlook when you are going for a big company like Dell is really doubling down on your interview prep and really crushing that video screening.
Yeah, I had one person that I worked with, and they didn't get past the video screening, and there was a lesson learned in it. And I think you might remember this because we talked about it, but he made a mistake in that he didn't realize that the reality of like the differences between business units at Dell. There's many business units just like at a big company like Oracle. And when they asked him why would customers buy Dell EMC, which was an actual question from the video interview, he talked about Dell laptops. So let's hit on this real quick. Isn't it like important to know for a big enterprise company, if you want to work with the big names, to distinguish between their business units?
Totally. And I'd even say like in general, I'm seeing it more and more often is that the first phone screening or like video screening, there's typically a question that asks about like our product. Like, hey, like explain our product like you're explaining it to your grandma, like in a very simplistic way. And like, let's be real, like so many people do the spray and pray methodology of trying to get a job. Like, oh, let's just, apply to 200 companies and hope that we get an interview. The problem is a lot of people don't invest 15 to 30 minutes after they get that first interview to make sure they understand the product they're interviewing for. And I've seen this happen at Dell, Salesforce, Google, where people, they're like, oh yeah, like I'm selling laptops. And it's like, no, like Dell EMC enterprise storage is way different than laptops. And if you don't know that, it's an instant turnoff for the hiring manager.
Yeah, it was an acquisition at Oracle. They acquired NetSuite, right? There's different product units. And at Google, I mean, yeah, you've got Google Ads, you've got YouTube, different business units. So just make sure we know what business unit we're interviewing for. And I would argue that like questions related to why customers buy a product or essentially selling a product, I would almost put it in the slam dunk category these days. Like you should know before opening your mouth, as you put so well. Like just have an idea of a little bit about the product, not the bells and whistles or technically, but like why customers buy and the business outcomes it drives.
Totally. And also it's like when people get hung up on like what customers buy from us, it's like, just look at the company's website. Yeah. Like they literally have case studies posted. Yeah. Like you should be able to tell what type of companies buy from the company you're interviewing for in like 5 minutes.
Yeah. I've lost track of time. I don't even know where we are, but I have 2 more questions related to landing a job, and then want to talk about your fast track to have 4 roles, 3 promotions in 2.5 years. That's nuts. I haven't seen that before at a top company. So cold call role play and then negotiating salary. These are good ones. So the cold call role play, we don't have to like go through one, it's like, that's a whole can of worms. Could be a whole conversation, but any tips, quick and dirty tips for the cold call role play and making it being successful?
Yeah, I'd say when you do your cold call, like tonality is big. Like don't be overexcited. Feel free to just come in cool and confident. I'd say like general principle of a cold call or discovery call is the balance of qualification to positioning. And so a lot of times when you're on a cold call, like you're not instantly starting off with like a pitch, like, yeah, you're going to ask for permission for their time, do it in like a very cool way where they feel like they're minimizing the risk of staying on the call and like they're going to get value out of it. But ask them like good questions. Like if it was, a lead that came in through a marketing event, like be like, hey, how was the event? Just keep it short, simple, ask them about it, let them talk. And then keep asking them questions. And then the main thing is like, you can position a little, like draw curiosity, but I would say where most people fail in the cold call is just the call to action. Like, hey, like, sounds like you had a great time at the marketing event. What would make the most sense for us is really just to understand how, a solution like ours could augment your current solutions. And I'd love to set up, 15 minutes with a dedicated resource on our end just to explore different opportunities that sit in the market and how we can help you guys continue to grow. And so when you do the cold call, like really just have a good tone, qualify out, and then have a good call to action. If you haven't done sales before, it's like really awkward to ask people for time or do like a hard close. But the reality is like sellers are movers and shakers. And so you have to set a clear call to action at the end of the cold call just to display that you have confidence.
And sales is messy, especially cold calling. You could prepare all you want, but the customers will try and get you off the phone and try and, object to you. And part of it's just hanging in there too, I think, in the role play. But I like what you said about tone. Don't be like, hey, Jay, this is Chris calling from Google. Hey, Jay, this is Chris calling from Google. How you been?
Yeah.
I'm not even saying I would be that calm, cool, and collected. I still get a little nervous, but at least setting that intention for a tone like that, asking questions, you made a good point. I think like trying to understand like what was the event like, or understanding their current situation and trying to understand some pain points is really helpful. And I heard something about like cold calls that last a little bit longer tend to have a higher chance of conversion. And obviously in these role plays, they're not going to, I just don't think that typically you're going to just immediately set the meeting. Like there's going to be objection. You got to be ready to handle it. And they want to hear that you can actually do a little bit of discovery. So good tips, that's obviously not the brunt of this conversation today, but thanks for going there. One thing that I think that you have unique insight around is negotiating. You help someone, and I observed this myself, get a salary that was way higher than their peers through your support of them in negotiation. So how much higher was their pay than like their peers? And then let's dig into like the advice you gave and what they implemented.
Yeah. So we didn't figure out how much we negotiated more than everyone else they started out with until they actually started the role and their quotas were handed out, because the amount they made per appointment was like significantly higher than their colleagues. And so they just asked straight up, like, what's your pay? And the person we were working with actually negotiated $10K higher than everyone else they started out with.
Unreal.
So it was crazy, but it's a competitive market. Like I don't do a lot of like straight up partnerships with some companies because I'm really for the people, in terms of I want people to come through my program and literally have it like pay for itself like 10x. Like that's my goal. So yeah, like it was about 10K more than anyone else, and that didn't include like signing bonus or the equity they negotiated. And I think like the 5,000 shares of equity that they negotiated as well would have equated to like 500,000 when they went public, which they're still in the process of that. But it's one of my favorite parts. It's like, let's put money in your pocket. Like that's why a lot of us are in sales.
Yeah, people don't know how to negotiate too. Like when I say people, a lot of the folks that are looking for these roles are either coming out of college or they're making a career change. It's just new territory. And obviously negotiation is a sales and life skill that's important. And just having someone like you to guide them and say like, hey, like don't let them pressure you, and take time to think it through or share. Maybe you could, mention this. It can actually make a 10K difference or more in the case of that equity and that higher commission rate. So what was the advice that you gave? Wasn't it pretty simple? Like, were they like, oh, hey, what range do you see yourself in? Like, if you don't mind, it'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah. I know. In salary negotiation, there's a million ways that I teach. There's, simple ways, but it's very context based on like what someone's going through. But for this person in particular, and it's funny because a lot of it actually shows confidence. Yeah. But one of the things that like a recruiter will say during the interview is like, the range for this position is between 60 and 80K. And the immediate response that the person I was working with gave, which I told them to, is I was like, yeah, like I'd need to be at the upper end of that range, like very confidently. Yes. Like really establishing their value, which a lot of people forget to do during the interview process, like show them you're valuable. And so that tactic alone literally convinced the hiring managers that if we hire this person, and granted they interviewed very, very strong as well, which allows you to justify a higher pay. Like if you do bad during the interview process and you demand a higher pay, it's just not going to add up. And so they did everything flawlessly, from the cover letter, resume, LinkedIn, all the way to the actual interview prep itself, all the way to the point where they could say that statement confidently, and they believed it because they did such a good job preparing.
And having someone like you in the program Elite Tech Sales is what can give someone the edge to just crush every aspect of the process and build that self-esteem, and then understand that they have an approach when it comes time to negotiate on top of the self-esteem they built from their execution that can again land them a much higher, starting pay, which is so cool. That's a gift, man. I love that, how you contribute to the people you work with. It's amazing.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah, sure.
Because this is a common pitfall I see with people is it's sad that it has to be this way, but the reality is recruiters and hiring managers, they are in the business of saving the company money. Like a lot of them get metriced on like, how much are we giving candidates? Can we get them for a lower price? Like things like that, which isn't the best, but it's like this tug of war you have to play. And like the other main piece of advice is like the first person to give their number typically loses, which I hate that it has to be that way. But if a recruiter asks you like, hey, like, what are you expecting? Like they have the role, like they know what the range they want to pay is. And so for me, like I never feel obligated to give my number. Like what I ask is like, and this is very true, is like when I interview at companies, I'm interviewing at a lot of different companies at once. And so my thing is like, I'm going to put my best foot forward. I'm going to ask for a fair market value for what they see for the role, but I'm not going to give up my number first. And I think that's something I've seen a lot of people do where they either give up their number or the recruiter gives the range like, oh yeah, like 60 to 80. And they're like, okay, that's cool with me. And you're just kind of chill about it. Like, I think it's nice to add a sense of value within your response of being like, yeah, like you could frame it a different way, but I want to be at the upper end of that range, if not more. Really establishes like the value that you know that you can bring. And it's not just like a psychological trick. Like I actually teach people how to be a top 1% SDR within the curriculum I've developed. So it's not like these people are just negotiating and not making an instant revenue impact. Like that person I helped negotiate that salary 10K more, believe it or not, hit 300% of their quota during ramp up, which made a significant impact for the company. And so they knew their value.
And going through a program like yours, people can be confident and know internally they're capable. And that self-belief actually is what determines what we usually make. It's amazing how our external wealth is determined by our internal sense of wealth. So that is so cool. It's so powerful. Let's do a rapid fire as we wrap up, because again, I don't even know how far long it's been. But on the path to promotion, you know, like and you got 3 promotions in 4 years. So let's finish up with this. What are some keys to getting promoted rapidly? And before that, tell us the roles you had and then those tips. And then you've got a couple expressions that I like activities, oxygen, and we're going to talk about the importance of systems and then talk about elite tech sales. So let's rapid fire that. So first, what were all the promotions you had and what are the keys to getting promoted quickly?
Yeah. So I had 4 different roles. I had sales development rep, account executive, district manager of account executives, and then field sales. All taught me a lot of different skills, which I love because I needed to be stimulated. In terms of how I made it happen, like all good things in sales, like there's no silver bullet. And there's different things. Like the first thing that you have to do is like, you actually have to be good at your role. Like you have to put in the work, you have to learn how to do it, and you have to learn how to do it well. The second thing is you always need to understand who is the decision maker in terms of if you get promoted or not. So clearly, like if you can make your manager's life easier and like they speak good about you to their senior manager, you typically have higher likelihoods to get promoted. If you make your manager's life awful, like the odds of you getting promoted are probably slim to none. As well as like just timing. Like for example, when I became a district manager, like it was the perfect timing because like some people at Dell, like they'll stay in management roles forever. Like I luckily got in when I was 24, which was like somewhat unheard of at the time. But like realistically, like if that district manager just wanted to stay there for like 2 years, like I would have never even had the opportunity to interview like against a very competitive group to get it. So I would say like a lot of things are, you know, timing and luck, but if you can do good at your role and then also educate yourself on the role you're going into, that's like a huge value add.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, building that political capital internally is important. Having people that you bring value to, like your manager and AEs who will vouch for you when it comes time for promotion. And I just remember that I met a partner that you introduced me to, that was a partner that helped you get your first deal over the edge. And she's now at AWS. And in my 9 to 5, I'm at an AWS partner. And that's, so anyways, context for the audience. And she said, wow, Jay was the golden boy of the Dell. And so clearly you had such a good internal brand and reputation and you made others look good. And by contributing to others and setting that example, you were elevated at promotion. So, okay, rapid fire, we're almost bringing it home. Oh yeah. Something you would tell me is activity is oxygen. I love that expression. And I just think it's a great way to be in sales and life. So what's that all about?
Yeah, it's a reminder that your daily inputs in sales really contribute to your outcomes. And so when you can figure out like what inputs you need to be very successful over any length of time, then you'll have success. So if the one input you need to do to have a successful quarter is hit like a certain revenue amount in terms of what you close, like what is the number one input that will lead to that? For most sellers, it's going to be pipeline generation. And so for me, it's like, okay, activity is oxygen. If I'm not building pipeline, I'm actually dying. And so that was like the main takeaway that I always told my team as a manager is like pipeline report, because like that is our lifeline in order to be successful.
Yeah. Another thing you said that I love is systems set me free. Right? You're a systems guy. Personally, I'm a little more manual, but systems are powerful. Like how have systems helped you become successful? And honestly, like from what I heard from what you told me, you were working like very minimal hours at Dell and the top performer. So maybe it played a part in that. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I believe in building systems, especially for monotonous tasks. And what I did when I took each of my new roles at Dell that helped me advance very quickly is I spent about my first 4 to 6 weekends in that role, like Saturdays when everyone else was having fun. I actually wrote down on paper all the monotonous things that I hated about the role, like legit. So it'd be like responding to emails after a proposal, or like even building a proposal, like all these things that just take up so much time. And I'm like, anything that can be systematized should, because I should spend 70% of my time pure selling and upskilling myself and not doing admin. And so throughout those first 4 to 6 weeks, I would build email templates. I'd build proposal decks, like anything that I could keep in my internal arsenal. So I wasn't actually spending energy doing it during the workday. And for me, Saturdays were the best day because it felt like, I don't know if you've had this experience, but it felt like the only time I could get pure focused work done without getting like blown up on Microsoft Teams with like people chatting me. And yeah, like ultimately I pride myself on building good systems. And even when I left Dell as a field seller, like I always had one of the highest pipeline contributions and everything. And I knew how to work my ecosystem. So we would all work as a team. I had other field sellers approach me and they're like, Jay, will you teach us your system? And so I built out Notion pages where I teach them all how to, get the most C-levels to customer events. I systematized that. Like I built systems for everything because I knew those were assets that would free up my time to work on very complex things. Like, all right, this like C-level's not getting back to me after a proposal. Like, how can I creatively get back in the arena? So that's my thing, is like figure out what's weighing you down and systematize it.
Yeah. And they say Saturdays are for the boys, and that's why we're here today.
Exactly.
And, Saturdays also for the time to figure out the problems in the role and how you can systematize them out of your life and deal with them so you focus on the highest value work, like figuring out how to get back to that executive. So really good stuff. Let's finish up by talking about the system you built, Elite Tech Sales, to help people land jobs in tech sales, really open up amazing new opportunities in their life. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So when I started Elite Tech Sales, like I just saw a really big opportunity in the market where I didn't see a lot of people teaching people how to break into top companies. I kind of looked at like a lot of the founders and stuff, like this whole like boot camp model. And when I looked at them, I was like, none of these people have really worked in tech sales or had success themselves. And so it was like this major aha moment where I was like, okay, well, if I could land at Dell with literally a Bachelor of General Studies, no technical experience, and advance 4 roles in 2.5 years, I might know a thing or two that no one else has exposure to on the market. And so when I started Elite Tech Sales, I built it on how can we efficiently teach people how to be a top 1% SDR, interview better than 99% of candidates, negotiate the salary they deserve, and get promoted quickly. And there's a ton of nuances to it in terms of being in the right vehicle, preparing right, and doing all these things. But I think when we look at a lot of the success we've had, we're so differentiated in the market. Like there's not a lot of people who can really compete with it. Like I would say like probably like in terms of like experience working at big companies, what we would call like market leaders, like you're one of the other people I would look to. I'd be like, wow, like this guy's not a coach. Like he's a player and a coach. And I think that's what is missing in like the transformation of landing with the top company and having success, is a lot of people preach it, but they haven't had it themselves. And so, yeah, like doing it at Dell, you doing it at Google and Oracle, like it's amazing, but it's a lost art. And even within the art of teaching that transformation, there could be a good player, but not a good coach. And so even when I built out the system, like I'm such a systems guy that I reminisced on every training I ever went throughout my whole life. And I was like, wow, like I actually hate when there's a lot of fluff and not actionable things for me to do. So how can I create this in the fastest manner possible?
Yes.
And that's really contributed to a lot of success we've had and like a lot of aha moments for people we work with.
Yeah. I love seeing your testimonials of people you helped on LinkedIn, and you're opening up these opportunities for people and helping them open up those opportunities faster because you're the real deal. And I've known you for 3 years. You're a personal friend and you're someone who performs at the highest level at the highest companies. You get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The best companies. Am I high? No, I'm not. So I just love what you're doing, man. Thank you so much for all the insight you shared. Just to the audience, I think you guys are over there. I linked Elite Tech Sales in the description of this video. I encourage you guys to check that out. I linked Jay's LinkedIn as well if you want to talk to him directly. Do you have any like free trainings though? And like, what's the best place to find you and get going?
Yeah, totally. So it's kind of funny. Like I started posting content on LinkedIn maybe like 7 weeks ago, and I've actually grown a lot. I think it was from maybe like 2,700, we're like 4,500. So it's been like a ton of growth very quickly and a ton of DMs and everything. But I would say like where I'm really forced to give away the most value is my newsletter. That's just a place where I just give out as many secrets as possible. I think like the biggest transformation I've had recently is it's like, it started off with like, how can I make more money? And like, it actually changed to like, how can I make a bigger impact? And the way I can give people a bigger impact is by giving people more wins repeatably. And so even with like my LinkedIn content newsletter, like anything people are subscribed to, it's like all value added. And my thing is like, I would like in an ideal world, I would hopefully give someone like 10 or 20 wins before they even know I have a paid product.
I love that. So I'll make sure that the newsletter's linked first.
Yeah.
And guys, check out that newsletter. That's good stuff, Jay. And I noticed, you just have a generous heart. You're helping people. And of course that abundance flows back. That's just how it goes. So again, appreciate the time, man. If any final call to action before we officially sign off?
I would say,
or any challenge, I guess, to the audience is maybe what I mean.
Yeah. So challenge I have is do big stuff outside of work. I typically threw this in all the QBRs when I was a manager. I would challenge people at the very end to write down their personal and professional goals. I think in every scenario, everyone with big personal goals outside of work tended to crush it in the office. And so if you feel bogged down by your career, the economy, not getting promotions, losing that $300,000 deal, not landing that dream role, have stuff going on outside the office. Sign up for that race, do the bodybuilding competition. The happiest people I've worked with and the most successful people don't keep all their eggs in one basket. And I know that seems very contradictory to, say that instead of just go all in sales, but I promise you, it actually makes you a better person to go all in multiple things inside and outside of work and stay diversified.
Wow. I think that's a message all of us needed to hear. Put the eggs in different baskets, not just in one.
Exactly.